47 slaves saw it happen under a Mississippi sun that burned the sky to white. 47. But not a single one spoke a word to the sheriff, not a whisper to the priest, not even to the undertaker who came to collect what was left of the master. What they saw in that field that morning in 1851 was not meant to be written in any ledger or stored in any courthouse archive, because what happened on the Rutledge plantation was not simply death, it was unmaking. A reckoning that moved through the human body the way rot moves through wood, silent at first, then total. The official record called it accidental exsanguination. That's the phrase printed in the Warren County files. It means led to death. But what they didn't write was how a man could bleed through his skin without a single cut on his body. They didn't write about the strange carvings found burned into the floorboards of the cotton gin, markings the coroner could not explain. They didn't mention that for 3 weeks after the master's death, not a single slave dared to enter that field at sunrise, because they swore they could still hear the sound of his blood soaking into the earth. Mississippi was built on ledgers, on numbers, on the arithmetic of human misery. Every nail, every pound of cotton, every slave's birth and death, counted and filed. But for the month of September 1851, the Rutledge plantation's books went blank. Empty lines where the cotton weights should have been. No roll calls, no rations, nothing but silence written in ink, as if history itself had turned its face away from what happened. And in that silence, a name was whispered through the slave quarters: Caleb. They called him the Ghost, an albino field hand with eyes the color of rose quartz, skin so pale it seemed to glow in moonlight. To the white men, he was a curiosity. To the slaves, he was something else, a walking omen. They said he never sweated, never spoke unless spoken to, and when he looked at you, it felt like he was measuring the distance between your soul and the grave. But what no one understood, not even the ones who feared him most, was that Caleb had been waiting for years, waiting and preparing, because the soil of Mississippi doesn't just grow cotton, it grows vengeance. Before I go any further, I want you to mark yourself present. This isn't just a story, it's a ritual of remembering. If you're still here, if you're brave enough to hear what really happened that morning, type "The veil is broken" twice in the comments. Let me see who among you is willing to look into the mirror of buried history and tell me, where are you listening from? What city? What country? What night's silence hides your voice? Subscribe if you haven't yet, because from this point on, every word will pull you deeper into what Mississippi tried to erase. The story of Caleb the Ghost begins where blood met cotton, and the earth refused to forget. Nathaniel Rutledge was a man born of thunder, not the kind that rose, but the kind that rolls low and endless, shaking the ground long after the lightning's gone. By 39, he owned 400 acres of cotton, 62 slaves, and a reputation that crawled ahead of him like a storm cloud. The men in Vicksburg called him the Iron Planter, not because of his strength. He was not a strong man, but because his will was forged in cruelty and his temper never cooled. He wasn't tall, but he filled every room with the kind of presence that made even the floorboards tense. His voice was soft, almost kind, until it wasn't. The overseers feared that quiet tone more than any shout, because when Nathaniel spoke low, something terrible was about to follow, and his favorite place to speak in that tone was the fields. Rutledge believed pain was the only honest form of communication. When a slave dropped from exhaustion, he didn't order punishment, he performed it. Bare-handed, methodical, as though each strike was a sermon. He'd tell the others watching, "The flesh is weak. The whip teaches it to remember." Those words still echo in the diary of a neighbor's daughter who once witnessed him tie a boy to a post until the boy's back looked like a map of Mississippi. Red rivers, broken borders. But among his entire labor force, one figure bothered him: Caleb. Rutledge hated what he didn't understand, and Caleb was an unanswered question carved in pale skin. His albinism offended the planter's order of the world. A black man with white skin, a slave who looked like the ghost of the very thing Rutledge claimed to be. He often told guests that Caleb was trick of God's humor, something between mockery and miracle. But behind closed doors, the master would watch him in the field longer than he watched the others. There was something in Caleb's stillness that unsettled him. The way he never flinched under heat, the way his pale eyes never blinked at pain. One afternoon, when the sun melted the horizon into fire, Rutledge walked out to where Caleb was picking cotton alone. He stood behind him for nearly a minute before speaking. "Do you feel the sun, boy?" he asked. Caleb didn't turn. "I asked you a question." Caleb raised his head slightly, his voice barely more than a breath. "I feel what the Lord allows me to feel." It was the first time Rutledge had heard him speak. Something in the calm of it, the quiet defiance, sank into the planter's chest like a splinter. He said nothing, just walked away. But from that day on, something changed between them. The master began to test him, to push him. Extra hours, double weight, no water breaks. Yet Caleb never broke. He worked until night fell, silent, steady, eyes fixed on the cotton, as if counting every fiber between him and freedom. What Rutledge didn't know was that Caleb was counting something else. Days. Because vengeance, like cotton, grows best under pressure. They called her Mother Seller. No one knew how old she was. Some said 70, others swore she was born before freedom ever had a name. Her back was bent like a question mark, her hair the color of smoke, and her eyes. Two coins of yellow glass that seemed to see straight through your words. She lived at the far end of the slave quarters, in a shack no bigger than a coffin, filled with jars of roots, bones, and dried river mud. The children whispered that she could talk to the dead. The overseers avoided her altogether. When the master's wife fell ill one winter, and the preacher's prayers failed, it was Mother Seller who left a jar of crushed herbs on the porch. By morning the fever broke. Rutledge's wife recovered, but the jar was gone, and the master pretended it had never appeared. He couldn't admit that a slave woman's spell might hold more power than his God. To the slaves, though, Seller was more than a healer. She was a keeper of memory, of names the world tried to erase. When a newborn came into the world, she whispered an old name into its ear before the master could record a new one. A secret name that the fields could not take away. It was to her that Caleb went the night after Rutledge's quiet threat. He came barefoot, shirtless, his pale skin glowing under the moon like a haunting. He didn't knock. He just stood in the doorway until Seller looked up from her bowl of crushed blackberries. "You're late, ghost child," she murmured, her voice dragging the words slow and heavy. "The ground been whispering your name for 3 summers now." "You think I can't hear it?" Caleb said nothing at first. Then he stepped forward, eyes hollow but burning. "He marked my mother," he said simply. "I'm here to mark him back." Seller studied him for a long time, so long that the wind outside seemed to pause. Then she reached into a clay jar and pulled out a bundle wrapped in old linen. Inside were 3 things: a shard of mirror, a lock of horsehair, and a handful of red earth. She handed them to Caleb. "These ain't just things," she said. "They're doors. You open 'em wrong, you don't close 'em again. You understand?" Caleb nodded. Seller leaned close until he could smell the ash on her breath. "Then listen. There's power in the blood, ghost child, but not the way white men use it. They spill it to rule. We call it back to remember. The land's been drinking for too long. Time to make it spit." That night under the cypress trees, she drew circles in the dirt with his pale hand and whispered in a tongue that had never known chains. The firelight trembled, the air thickened, and somewhere deep beneath the earth, something old began to stir. The ghosts of Mississippi were waking, and Caleb was no longer just a man. He was becoming a vessel. By the first week of October, the wind on the Rutledge plantation had changed. It carried something sharp in it, a smell of iron and rain, though no storms had come. The dogs barked through the night, their chains clattering like warning bells. Chickens refused to roost. The overseer, Clements, said the air felt heavy as wet wool, but couldn't explain why. Nathaniel Rutledge laughed it off at first. "Superstition," he said. "Negro nonsense." But when the well turned red 3 mornings later, his laughter died in his throat. The water wasn't blood. At least, that's what the men told themselves. They said it was rust from the old pump handle, though the iron had never bled before. Yet, when they drew a bucket, the smell was copper and salt, and the slaves wouldn't drink. They whispered that the earth had begun to remember. that it was coughing up what it had swallowed, bone by bone, sin by sin. Caleb worked silently through it all, his pale hands steady, his eyes calm. When others trembled, he stood still, watching the fields as if listening to something only he could hear. The cotton bloomed faster around him, unnatural, thick as snow, and the overseer took note. "That ghost boy's row is twice as full," he told Routledge. "Ain't natural." The master only scowled. "Then double his load," he said. That night, the first scream came. It wasn't human. The sound ripped through the quarters at midnight, a deep, raw howl that seemed to crawl through every wall. The slaves woke in silence, clutching their children, whispering prayers they'd learned in a language older than the Bible. When morning came, they found the overseer's mule dead by the barn, its eyes white as milk and its body untouched, no wound, no mark, nothing but a dark pool beneath it. Routledge blamed witchcraft. He stormed through the quarters with his shotgun, dragging men out by their collars, demanding to know who had cursed his land. No one spoke, no one dared. When he passed Caleb, the albino slave simply met his gaze, calm, unflinching. For the first time, Routledge looked away. By the third night, the whispers began. The field hands said they came from the cotton itself, soft, rustling voices that murmured names when the wind blew. Some said they heard the names of the dead. Others swore they heard the master's own name, drawn out in a voice that wasn't human. Nay, the kneel. The sound of it made the hairs rise on every neck. Mother Seller knew then that the door they'd opened was wide now, and something old had crossed through. "You done called him ghost child," she told Caleb. "Now you best be ready when he calls back." Caleb didn't answer. He just looked toward the fields, his pale eyes reflecting the faint red glow that now seemed to hover over the cotton each dusk. The land was waking, hungry and vengeful, and before the harvest was done, the master's blood would feed it. Nathaniel Routledge stopped sleeping. He tried laudanum, bourbon, even the preacher's prayers whispered over his bed, but every time his eyes closed, something waited for him in the dark. At first it was only sounds, a rustle, a whisper, a low hum like bees in a wall. But soon the dreams came, and in those dreams, the fields were not white with cotton. They were white with faces, the faces of the slaves he had beaten, buried, and forgotten. Their eyes were open, their mouths moved without sound, and when he leaned closer to hear them, they began to bleed from the eyes. He woke screaming every night, drenched in sweat, his sheets twisted like ropes around his legs. The doctor called it night terrors, but the slaves called it justice. In the daylight, his rage grew worse. He fired 2 overseers in a week, claiming they were plotting against him. He accused his cook of poisoning his food, then forced her to eat from his plate. He paced the veranda at dawn, mumbling to himself, clutching his shotgun like a talisman. "Something's in this ground," he told his neighbor, old Mr. Davenport. "Something crawling under my land." Davenport just nodded politely, but he didn't visit again. What Routledge didn't know was that Mother Seller had buried 3 jars in the corners of his cotton fields. One with salt, one with hair, one with the soil from the grave of a slave he'd whipped to death years before. Each night, as Caleb worked silently beneath the moon, the jars cracked open, and the earth exhaled what it had been holding back for decades. The plantation began to decay from the inside out. The cotton turned gray before harvest. The well dried overnight. The hogs refused to eat. And in the main house, paint began to peel in the shape of human hands. But the worst was the sound. Every dusk, as the sun sank low, Routledge would hear it, a steady, rhythmic drip, as if rain was falling from the ceiling, yet the roof was dry. The walls were dry still. The sound followed him from room to room until it seemed to echo inside his skull. One night he struck a match and followed the sound to his study. There, on the wall above his desk, a stain had begun to bloom, dark red, spreading slowly downward like ink in water. He reached out to touch it, and his fingers came away wet. The drip quickened. His heartbeat matched it. When he looked down, there was blood on his hands. That was the first time he said Caleb's name out loud. "Ghost boy," he whispered, his voice shaking. "What have you done?" But outside, in the moonlight, Caleb stood by the field, still, calm, listening. The wind moved through the cotton like breath through lungs, and if you stood close enough, you could hear it whispering the same thing over and over. Not yet. By mid-October, the curse no longer waited for nightfall. It came walking bold beneath the sun. Nathaniel Rutledge had begun to see things that no man with waking eyes should see. It started at breakfast. The clatter of a spoon, the shadow of a figure that shouldn't have been there. He looked up and saw Caleb standing in the doorway of the dining room, still as glass, staring with those pale, lifeless eyes. Rutledge blinked, and Caleb was gone. But when he turned back to his plate, 3 crimson fingerprints stained the edge of his napkin. He tried to shake it off, told himself it was fatigue. The doctor called it melancholia of the nerves. The preacher said it was the devil testing his faith. But at night, when he pressed his ear to the floorboards, he could hear it. A heartbeat that wasn't his own. The house itself was breathing. The slaves kept their distance. No one wanted to work near the main house. The rumor had spread that the master had been touched, that his soul had already begun to rot from the inside. Even the white men, the overseers and neighboring planters, began to whisper. Old Rutledge is losing his mind, they said. Too much guilt in that man's bones. But Caleb moved through the plantation like a ghost that didn't need the dark. He was always there, in the corner of a field, at the edge of the barn by the well, silent, patient, watching. The children stopped playing where he passed. The women crossed themselves under their breath. His pale skin caught the light like moonstone, his eyes glimmering faintly pink, unblinking. Mother Sella knew what was happening. The blood dun called him. She whispered one evening as she watched Caleb from her doorway. And the land's answering back. She could feel it in her bones. The curse had entered its second stage. The spirit that slept beneath the soil was now awake, feeding. Rutledge began to deteriorate. His skin grew ashen. His eyes sank deep into their sockets, ringed with red. He spoke to people who weren't there. His dead father, the preacher who'd baptized him, even his long-buried slaves. One morning his wife found him standing in the parlor, shirtless, staring at his reflection. He'd carved something into his own chest with a razor, a mark shaped like a spiral, the same sigil Caleb and Sella had drawn in the dirt weeks before. When she screamed, he didn't even flinch. He just whispered, "It's coming out. The blood's coming out." That same night he ordered Caleb to be brought to him. 2 men went to fetch the albino slave from his quarters. They returned pale as death. "Sir," one of them stammered, "he ain't there." Rutledge's hands began to shake. "Then where is he?" Neither man spoke, but through the window behind them, far across the field, they saw him, Caleb, standing alone in the cotton, waiting. And in the still air between them something began to hum, low, deep, and alive. The land itself was answering his call. That evening, the sun sank behind the cypress trees like a wounded eye. The air was too still, too heavy. Even the crickets had gone silent. Every man, woman, and child on the Rutledge plantation felt it in their chest. Something was coming. The dogs refused to bark. The mules refused to move. And in the distance, thunder rolled where no storm cloud hung. Nathaniel Rutledge rode out with a lantern and his shotgun, the light shaking in his trembling hand. He told no one where he was going, but everyone knew. The field, the place where the whispers began. The slaves gathered in the shadows, clutching one another, praying without sound. They could see his lantern bobbing through the rows of cotton, a single flame swallowed by the dark. When he reached the center of the field, Caleb was waiting. He stood barefoot among the cotton, his white skin glowing faintly in the moonlight, his shirt open, chest rising and falling slow. Like a man listening to the heartbeat of the world, the wind bent the stalks around him in a circle, as though the field itself was breathing with him. Rutledge raised his gun. You think you can haunt me, boy?" His voice cracked in the emptiness. "You and that witch of yours." Caleb said nothing. His eyes were calm, sad even, as if he pitied the man in front of him. "I own you!" Rutledge shouted, voice trembling with rage. "You hear me? I own this land! I own your blood!" At that, Caleb finally spoke. His voice was soft, but it carried. "No, master," he said. "This land owns you." The lantern flickered, then it went out. For a heartbeat, there was silence, and then the ground moaned. It wasn't thunder this time. It was the earth itself shifting beneath their feet. The cotton bent low, the soil cracking open like a mouth gasping for air. Rutledge stumbled backward, cursing, his gun falling from his hands. A smell rose from the ground, sweet and rotten, the stench of something long buried being pulled from its sleep. The slaves watching from afar saw the light, a faint red glow spreading through the field like veins under skin. And in the center of that glow, the master's scream tore through the night. They said his body convulsed, his arms twisting, his skin turning pale as chalk. Blood poured from his nose, his ears, his eyes, soaking the cotton beneath him until the field looked painted in crimson. Caleb never moved. He only watched, silent, as if witnessing something promised long ago. When the shaking stopped, Rutledge was still. The moon broke through the clouds, lighting his face, white as Caleb's now, drained of every drop of blood. Caleb turned, his bare feet sinking into the wet earth, and walked back toward the quarters without a word. The field behind him was silent again, but those who stood witness swore the ground was breathing, slow and steady, as though it had fed. By morning, the cotton was red. By sunrise, the Rutledge plantation was no longer a place of the living. The overseers found the master lying face up between the rows, his body white as paper, every vein empty. As if the blood had simply fled, his eyes were open, staring toward the sky, and his mouth was twisted into a shape no prayer could fix. The doctor who examined him later wrote, "Loss of blood with no external wound, impossible to explain. The slaves didn't come near the body. Not out of fear of punishment, but out of reverence. The old ones crossed themselves and whispered. The land took what it was owed." Mother Sailor didn't speak at all. She just looked toward the horizon, her yellow eyes glinting like lanterns. By noon the field had turned wrong. The cotton, once white and soft, had darkened to a pinkish hue, as though every bloom had drunk from what soaked the soil beneath it. The air carried the copper scent of blood, and no wind stirred. Even the birds refused to cross above. The sheriff came by evening. He asked questions that had no answers. Who saw what? Who touched the body? Where's the albino boy? But every slave said the same thing. They hadn't seen Caleb since the night before. Some swore he'd walked into the cotton and vanished. Others whispered that he'd melted into the soil. When the sheriff turned his back, Mother Sailor muttered, "Ain't no vanishing. He's just gone home." Within a week, the plantation collapsed. The slaves refused to pick another stalk from the cursed field. 2 overseers fled in the night after claiming they heard whispering under their beds, voices calling their names. Rutledge's wife packed a single trunk and rode away with her child before sunrise, never to return. By month's end, the house stood empty. The shutters hung loose. The well grew over with moss. Travelers passing through Warren County began to tell stories of a field that glowed red under the moon, and of a pale man seen standing at its center, head bowed, hands folded as if listening to the ground. They called him Caleb the Ghost. Some said he was cursed to walk that field forever, guarding the land that drank his master's blood. Others said he had become part of the soil itself, his spirit spreading through every root, every stalk, making the earth remember what it was forced to forget. Years later, children from nearby farms would dare each other to run through the old Rutledge field at night. They never made it halfway. They said the cotton whispered. They said the ground felt warm beneath their feet like a heartbeat. And if you stood still long enough, you could hear a voice, calm, quiet, and patient, saying, "The land remembers. Mississippi forgot Nathaniel Rutledge. His grave is gone, his name worn from stone. But the legend of the albino slave, who bled his master white, still lingers in every gust that moves through the delta fields." Some ghosts don't haunt people. They haunt the soil. Time moved on. Or at least, it pretended to. The Rutledge name was scrubbed from ledgers, the land sold off in pieces, the house left to rot. Nature swallowed the ruins whole. Kudzu climbed the porch posts, moss claimed the roof, and by 1900 only a chimney stood, a black finger pointing toward heaven in accusation. But the people of Warren County never forgot. Old men drinking on porches still warned travelers not to walk the back road at night. They said if you did, you might see him. That ghost white figure standing in the cotton, motionless, eyes glinting pink like twin stars. Some claimed he raised his hand in greeting. Others said he didn't move at all, just watched as though waiting for someone to confess. Children grew up on those stories. They learned to whisper his name, Caleb, only when the moon was hidden, and they learned what their parents meant when they said, "The land keeps score." Because in Mississippi, the soil isn't just red from clay, it's red because it remembers. Over 170 years later, farmers still say nothing grows right on that patch of ground. The cotton wilts too soon. The corn comes up sickly and pale. Every few years someone tries to plow it again, thinking the curse is just a story. But the tractors stall, the engines die, and always something goes wrong before the harvest. Archaeologists once dug there, trying to find traces of the old plantation. They found bones, dozens of them, buried shallow, tangled like roots. But none belonged to Nathaniel Rutledge. His body, they said, had simply vanished. Some think the river took him. Others know better. Because there are places on this earth that don't let go of what's been done to them. Places that hum with memory when the wind blows through. And if you stand there long enough, you'll feel it. That slow, rhythmic pulse under your feet. Like the ground itself has a heartbeat. Maybe Caleb never left. Maybe he became what every man of his kind was denied. Free, eternal, unchained. Maybe the soil carried his spirit, spreading it across every plantation that drank blood for cotton. Maybe, when the wind howls through the south, it's his voice reminding the world that nothing buried stays dead forever. So if you ever find yourself driving the back roads of Mississippi and your radio cuts out, if the air turns heavy, if you smell iron and rain though the sky is clear, don't look out the window. Don't slow down, because the moment you do, you'll see him standing in the field, white against the night waiting. And when you hear that whisper, the land remembers. You'll know it's not just a story. It's a warning. If you made it this far, type, "The land remembers," in the comments. Let me know you walked through this field with me tonight. Subscribe if you haven't, because every week we open another grave of forgotten history and remind the world what it tried to forget. There's a strange kind of silence that hangs over Mississippi when night falls. A silence that feels thick, alive, watchful. It settles on the old plantations and forgotten roads like a memory that refuses to fade. Locals say the wind there doesn't just move, it speaks. It carries whispers of names carved into history's unmarked graves. And if you listen long enough, you'll hear one name rise again and again, Caleb. They say he was born cursed, skin white as milk, eyes like blood, a child neither master nor slave could understand. But maybe that was never a curse. Maybe it was a sign. Because in a world built on the color of skin, Caleb was proof that even blood can't lie forever. When the master's cruelty became too heavy, the land took sides. The cotton fields, soaked with sweat and sorrow, became witnesses. And on that morning in 1851, when the overseers found Nathaniel Rutledge drained of life, it wasn't murder, it was judgment. Generations later, they still tell the story in whispers. Truckers on Route 61 say they've seen a figure standing near the old fence line, a man with eyes like dying embers, head bowed, as if praying. Cameras never capture him, and engines always fail when they stop too long. The air there, they say, tastes like rust. Historians have tried to trace the truth. But like all haunted things, it slips through paper and fact. No official records mention Caleb. His name never appears in any bill of sale or plantation ledger. But the oral stories, the ones passed down through black families across Warren County, all tell the same thing. A boy born too pale for this world became the ghost who made the land remember its sin, and maybe that's what he still does. Because every time thunder rolls through the Mississippi Delta, and the wind bends the fields, and the earth exhales that same quiet sigh, like breath from beneath the ground. They say ghosts are trapped souls, forever wandering, searching for peace. But Caleb isn't trapped. He became the peace, the reckoning, the reminder that justice doesn't always wear a badge or carry a torch. Sometimes it just waits, silent, patient, in the dirt until the world listens. So if you ever find yourself walking through a field at dusk and the light turns strange, pink and gold, soft but bleeding, don't be afraid. Just stop. Touch the soil, feel its warmth, because somewhere beneath your hand the story of Caleb still beats. And remember this, the ghosts of the South don't haunt people. They haunt the lies we tell to sleep at night. If this story made you feel something, if it made you stop and think about what history left buried, type, "I remember Caleb," in the comments. Because stories like his don't fade when we speak them. They rise again. And if you want to hear the next one, another lost voice, another truth beneath the dust, make sure you're subscribed. The South has many ghosts, and we've only just begun to dig. Decades after the last cotton was picked from the Rutledge land, travelers still avoided that stretch of road after dark. They said the air changed there. Heavy, damp, like a storm building without clouds. The trees bent away from the field as if afraid to look. Even the crows kept their distance, circling but never landing. In the 1920s, a preacher from Vicksburg tried to reclaim the ground. He said the Lord's word would cleanse it, that no spirit could stand against faith. He brought with him a Bible, a bottle of oil, and 3 young men to clear the brush. By sunset, all 4 were gone. The next morning, their mule returned to town alone, dragging an empty cart streaked with something dark and dried. The sheriff found them at dawn, standing upright in the field, each with a mouthful of cotton. No wounds, no blood, just silence. Their eyes, wide and glassy, were staring at the horizon, where the first light of day was trying and failing to touch the land. After that, no one came near the Rutledge property again. The preacher's church burned itself down 2 weeks later. No cause ever found. Some say it was lightning. Others said it was the curse finishing what had begun. By the 1950s, a highway had been planned to cut straight through the old plantation. Bulldozers rolled in, but when their shovels struck the soil, they broke. Not once, but every time. Workers quit mid-shift. A foreman swore he saw a white figure standing in the distance, just watching, he said. When they returned the next morning, tire tracks led in, but none led out. The project was abandoned before the first slab of asphalt was laid, and still the land waited. Locals began to notice something strange. On misty mornings, the field shimmered. Dew gathered on the cotton, but the droplets weren't clear. They were red. The soil beneath it felt soft, damp, like freshly turned earth. No one spoke of it aloud, but every mother in Warren County warned her children. Don't walk that field. That's where the land still breathes. Today, the Rutledge plantation is just a scar of overgrown wilderness, fenced off, silent, and untouched. But truckers passing the highway at night still report the same thing: a shape, pale and thin, standing in the fields, head bowed, motionless, with hands clasped as though in prayer. They call him the guardian of the blood fields. But those who know the story, the real story, know his name isn't Guardian, it's Caleb. And some nights, when the wind moves slow through the south and the moon sits heavy over the delta, you can almost hear him breathing with the land. The air trembles, the ground hums, and if you listen close enough, you'll hear that whisper rise again, the same one that's haunted Mississippi for 174 years. The land remembers. By the time the century turned and the Old South gave way to the modern world, Caleb's name had already become myth, half warning, half gospel. Folks said his ghost wasn't seen anymore, but felt. When new farms rose near the old Rutledge tract, their crops withered early. When whitewashed houses went up on that cursed soil, something in their walls would creak at night, slow, rhythmic, like breathing. In 1984, a construction crew digging for a foundation unearthed something that froze them where they stood. It wasn't one body. It was dozens, skeletal remains layered one atop another, ribs collapsed inward, wrists bound by rusted chains. There were no records, no names. The county coroner called it a slave burial site, likely mid-19th century. But to the locals, it was something else entirely. They called it Caleb's ground. A historian from Jackson came to study the site. She noticed something strange. The bones weren't aligned east to west, as was custom in slave burials. They were arranged in a spiral, curling inward toward a single empty space at the center. She wrote in her notes, "It's as if they were facing something or someone." When her report was published, people whispered that the empty space belonged to Caleb himself, not buried but returned to the soil. The county sealed the area soon after, claiming historical preservation, but the workers who fenced it off swore they heard music while hammering the posts, soft, ghostly humming, like the sorrow song sung in fields long ago. One man quit mid-shift, saying he felt hands in the dirt pulling at his boots. A pastor from Port Gibson led a small prayer vigil there. He brought candles and sang hymns until midnight. But when the wind shifted, his congregation went silent. They said the earth beneath them began to tremble, not violently, just enough to make the flames flicker sideways. Then from the darkness beyond the fence came a voice. Calm, low, almost gentle, it said, "The land remembers." The pastor left that night and never returned. He told the paper later, "Some graves don't need tending. Some have already been claimed." For generations, the legend of Caleb was passed like a secret between families, whispered by grandmothers over kitchen tables, by field hands during the harvest, by children huddled under blankets when the thunder rolled. But in every version, one truth stayed the same: Caleb didn't die for revenge. He became something else, a reminder, a reckoning, and maybe that's why the land around the old Routledge plantation still stands untouched. Not because of fear, but respect, because beneath that soil lies a memory too heavy to plow, too sacred to pave. A memory that bleeds when disturbed, a memory that whispers when the wind is still, and somewhere in that memory, the pale ghost of a boy stands watch, eyes red as dusk, guarding what history tried to forget. The land remembers. By the 21st century, the story of Caleb the Ghost had spread far beyond Warren County. It wasn't just a local legend anymore. It had become a haunting part of Southern folklore. You could find his name scribbled in dusty library archives, whispered on ghost tours in Vicksburg, or buried deep in internet forums where people swore they had seen him themselves. In 2003, a group of college students from Ole Miss, history majors chasing extra credit, decided to document the myth for a class project. They brought cameras, recorders, and all the arrogance that youth allows. They laughed at the locals who warned them not to stay past sundown. One of them even joked, "If the ghost shows up, we'll get him on tape and make a documentary." They entered the old Routledge field just before twilight. The grass was waist-high, the air heavy and wet. One student, a girl named Dana, noted in her journal that the wind sounded wrong, like it was breathing instead of blowing. Their cameras caught nothing unusual at first, just darkness, crickets, and the hum of faraway traffic. But at exactly 9:13 p.m., every device went dead. Cameras shut off, recorders stopped. Even the flashlight batteries drained at once. The group said it was a technical glitch, until one of them, standing near the center of the field, froze and pointed. There, about 20 yards away, was a figure, tall, thin, glowing faintly white under the moonlight. It didn't move. It didn't walk. It stood. They ran. Dana was the only one who looked back. She swore the figure didn't chase them. It just watched, head tilted slightly like it was remembering them. When she turned back again, it was gone. Later that week, the footage from the cameras was recovered. Most of it was static, but on one tape, just before the screen cut out, a single frame showed what looked like a face. Pale, expressionless, eyes faintly red. The timestamp, 9:13 p.m. The professor dismissed it as coincidence, but the students didn't sleep for weeks. Dana dropped out before graduation. Years later, in an interview, she said, "It wasn't fear, it was sadness, like the ground itself was mourning." After that, the Caleb story gained national attention. Paranormal investigators came with high-tech equipment and expensive cameras. They left with nothing but drained batteries and broken drones. A few admitted, off record, that they heard whispering in the recordings when they played them back. The words were faint but clear: "The land remembers." But not all visitors came seeking ghosts. Some came for truth. Descendants of enslaved families began visiting the site to lay flowers, to speak names forgotten by time. One elder said, "We ain't here to hunt no ghost. We're here to thank him. 'Cause if the land remembers, maybe heaven does too." And maybe that's what Caleb became. Not a monster, not a curse, but a guardian. A whisper in the dirt saying, "You are not forgotten." In 2016, a team of historians from the University of Southern Mississippi began a quiet investigation into the Routledge plantation legend. What started as folklore research soon turned into something far more disturbing. Deep in the archives of a private collection, a family estate once tied to the Confederacy, they discovered an old leather-bound ledger. Its cover was cracked, its pages brittle, But the name embossed on the front was unmistakable: Nathaniel Rutledge, 1849 to 1852. Inside were the records of every person he had ever owned. Names, ages, purchase prices, and punishments neatly written in ink that had long since faded to rust. But one entry caught their eye, because it wasn't like the others. It read simply, Caleb, male, age 19, albino, purchased for 45 from widow Hensley, keep from son, eyes unfit for labor. The next column, condition upon arrival, was empty. The following note, scrawled in smaller handwriting, chilled them to the bone. Unnatural pallor. Locals whisper he is cursed. If he dies, bury deep. That was the first and last mention of Caleb. After that page, his name vanished, but another entry appeared 6 months later, dated August 2nd, 1851, incident at Cotton Field. Overseer Johnson missing. Field hand Samuel reports seeing a white shadow moving between rows. Punishment tomorrow. The ledger stopped abruptly after that. The final page contained only one line, written in a shaky hand: the field hums when it rains, and beneath it, dried into the page, was a faint reddish smear, not ink. When the document went public, it reignited everything. Reporters flooded Vicksburg. Descendants of the Rutledge family denied its authenticity, claiming forgery. But experts confirmed the handwriting matched other verified records. The ink, they said, was genuine, and the date aligned perfectly with the oral stories of the master's death in 1851. For the first time, Caleb wasn't just a ghost story. He was real. Soon after the ledger's discovery, strange things began happening in the archive room where it was kept. Temperature drops, unexplained knocks, staff reporting the faint smell of iron and smoke. The university moved the book to a sealed vault, but one archivist, before leaving her post, confessed something that sent chills through everyone who heard it. She said she opened the ledger one night and found that the final page had changed. The ink had blurred, but a new line appeared beneath the old ones. In handwriting that didn't match the rest, it read, "The land remembers." Today the ledger is kept under glass, locked in climate control. Visitors aren't allowed to touch it. But if you look close, if the light hits just right, you can still see faint fingerprints pressed into the paper. No one knows who they belong to. Maybe the man who wrote it, maybe the boy who lived it, or maybe the land itself, reaching up through time to remind us that some truths refuse to stay buried. The discovery of Nathaniel Rutledge's ledger didn't just stir historians. It awoke the land. Within months, the university authorized a controlled excavation of the old plantation site. The research team called it a historical recovery project. But to the locals, it felt like digging into a wound that had never healed. They set up their tents along the edges of the former cotton fields. The summer air was thick, almost syrupy, and even the cicadas fell quiet when the shovels struck soil. From the very first day, strange things began to happen. Compass needles spun wildly, GPS devices malfunctioned, and when workers set down their tools, they swore they could hear humming, low, distant, like a man's voice carried through the dirt. The deeper they dug, the more the earth seemed to resist. Layers of soil shifted unnaturally fast, like the ground didn't want to be opened. On the third week, a graduate student uncovered something that made the entire site fall silent. It wasn't bone, it was a ring. Tarnished, nearly black with age, but its design was unmistakable. The initials carved into it read NR, the same as the name in the ledger. Beneath that layer, they found bones, hundreds of them, arranged in that same spiral pattern described decades earlier. But this time something was different. The soil surrounding the remains had turned a deep iron red, richer and darker than any natural clay in Mississippi. Samples were sent to a lab. When the results came back, the scientists said the soil contained a concentration of hemoglobin too high to be explained by decomposition alone. It was as if the ground had drunk blood. Then came the final discovery. Near the center of the spiral, they unearthed a coffin-shaped cavity, but it was empty. No body, no remains, nothing but compacted earth and a thin layer of salt. Embedded in that salt was something pale, a single strand of hair white as snow. DNA analysis was attempted. The machines failed repeatedly, each file corrupted beyond recovery. The lead researcher called it an environmental anomaly, but the crew called it something else: Caleb's mark. The university sealed the site within a week. The area was declared off limits for Safety reasons. But one member of the dig team, a young man named Reuben Lee, later admitted he couldn't sleep after the excavation. He said he kept hearing whispers at night, like the hum they'd heard under the soil. One night, he returned to the field alone. He left his phone recording, and by morning, he was gone. All they found was his equipment, and the last 10 seconds of audio. A slow rhythmic sound, like breathing. Then a whisper, soft but unmistakable. The land remembers. The case was ruled accidental disappearance. But those who know the story say Reuben didn't vanish. He was taken back. Because some spirits don't want to be disturbed. They only want to be remembered. Even now, when the sun sinks behind the cypress trees and the Mississippi sky bleeds gold into crimson, the field still looks alive. It breathes. The air moves in slow pulses, carrying that faint, metallic scent. Not rot, not rain, but something older. Something the earth has never let go. Locals say that's when the line between the living and the dead grows thin. That's when Caleb wakes. Every few years, someone drives past the old Rutledge Road and swears they see him. A figure standing just beyond the fence, still as the cotton, watching the horizon as if waiting for dawn that never comes. They say he never moves, never fades, just lingers, like a thought too heavy to forget. But the truth is, Caleb's ghost doesn't haunt one field. His spirit has scattered, seeped through the delta like veins of memory beneath the soil. He lives in every tree that sprouted where chains once hung. He hums in every river that once carried the cries of men bound for nowhere. He waits in the stillness between thunderclaps, reminding the world that the land itself remembers every lash, every scream, every sin. And when the storms roll through, those thick, electric tempests that sweep across the south, lightning sometimes strikes that cursed ground first. Locals say it's Caleb stirring the heavens, making sure no one ever truly forgets. Because silence for him was the greatest cruelty, and remembrance is the only justice time can still give. Tourists come now with cameras and flashlights, chasing ghosts for thrill. But the real haunting isn't what they see, it's what they feel. The weight, the sorrow, the quiet sense that something beneath their feet is watching them back. A preacher once said, "The blood of the oppressed never dries. It seeps into the roots of the world." Maybe that's what Caleb became. Not vengeance, not horror, but history's witness. A keeper of truth in a land built on forgetting. Because Mississippi still hums with the echoes of men like him, men born invisible, who left marks too deep to fade. And if you stand in that field long enough, if you listen between the chirping of crickets and the sighing of grass, you'll hear it too. A faint hum rising from below, steady as a heartbeat. It's the sound of a promise kept by the dead. It says the land remembers. So when you drive those quiet southern roads and see the cotton glowing under the moon, remember that it grew from more than soil. It grew from history, from pain, from blood that refused to disappear. Because ghosts like Caleb don't come to scare us. They come to make sure we never stop listening. And if you've listened tonight, if you felt it, type "The Land Remembers" in the comments. Subscribe because this isn't the last story buried beneath the dust. There are more fields, more names, more truths waiting to rise. And somewhere in the silence of the South, Caleb still stands, watching. Down beyond the field, the Mississippi River bends slow and wide, a mirror of old ghosts and lost names. That's where the story always ends. Not with screams, not with fire, but with water. Because in the South, everything finds its way back to the river. It was the river that carried the cotton, that carried the slave ships, that carried the songs of men chained below deck. It was the river that swallowed the bones, the bodies, and the stories that history tried to drown. But it never forgets. The current holds everything, whispers blood and memory, rolling them over and over through centuries until someone finally listens. On still nights, fishermen along the banks near Vicksburg say the water moves wrong near the old Rutledge Bend. It ripples against the wind. Some say it glows faintly, a reddish shimmer that fades when you blink. They claim to hear humming too, like a low, mournful hymn floating just beneath the surface, not loud enough to scare, just enough to remind. Old folks call that sound Caleb's song. It's said that after Rutledge's death, the river swelled higher than it had in years, flooding the edge of his plantation, washing through the fields like cleansing fire. They say that's where Caleb disappeared, not into death, but into the current, carried away by something greater than man or ghost. The river is patient. It carves through rock without rushing. It teaches the same lesson Caleb left behind, that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it flows quietly until it changes the whole shape of the land. And so the legend spread. From Mississippi to Arkansas, from Louisiana to the Gulf, boatmen began telling stories of a white figure walking along the riverbanks at night, head bowed, hands clasped behind him, as if searching for something in the water. They say he doesn't speak, he just listens. Maybe he's listening to what the river says, because rivers don't lie. They carry truth, no matter how deep you try to bury it, and that truth still runs through the South like veins under the soil, whispering to anyone who dares to hear. The land remembers, and so does the water. You can build highways, cities, and monuments over the bones of the past, but you can't silence a river. Every drop remembers where it's been. Every wave carries the reflection of what was done. So when you stand by that muddy water and hear it sigh against the banks, don't mistake it for wind. That's history breathing. That's Caleb's song moving through time, because ghosts don't always haunt houses. Sometimes they haunt rivers. And if you ever find yourself by the Mississippi on a still night and the current turns red in the moonlight, don't run. Just whisper back, I remember. Time moved on. The cotton rotted. The mansion sank into ruin. The name Rutledge faded from the ledgers of Mississippi like dust on forgotten tombstones. But the land never let go. Today, they call it Deer Creek County. It looks like any other stretch of southern soil. Rows of soybeans where cotton once grew, rusted silos where slave cabins stood. Kids ride their bikes past the ruins, unaware of what sleeps beneath their wheels. Preachers hold revivals in tents nearby, calling on the Lord while the ground beneath them hums with buried names. Locals will tell you the place is quiet now, peaceful even. But that's the trick of the South. Its silence isn't emptiness. It's memory disguised as calm. Sometimes when the fog rolls in heavy across the field, it swirls in shapes too deliberate to be wind. Outlines of figures walking, bending, reaching, like shadows caught between centuries. The old folks say that's the cotton rising again, bringing the souls of the lost back with it. And they still whisper Caleb's name. Not out of fear anymore, but reverence. He's become something else entirely, not a ghost, not a legend, but a warning wrapped in mercy. His story travels through generations like gospel. Teachers tell it in secret, poets write it in code. Because even now, speaking truth in the wrong room can feel dangerous. A man once tried to buy the land, planning to build a resort over the fields. But every survey failed. The ground kept sinking, machines malfunctioned, workers quit mid-shift, swearing they heard humming in the soil. By the time they left, the man claimed to dream every night of a pale figure standing in the fields, head bowed, silent, until dawn. When he woke, his sheets were streaked with red clay, though he hadn't stepped foot outside. He sold the property. It's been empty ever since. There's a saying that echoes across the South, the earth drinks what man spills. And if that's true, then this land is forever drunk on its own sins, haunted not by monsters but by memory. Because history isn't a ghost story, it's an inheritance. You can deny it, ignore it, pave it over, but it always finds a way back to your door. It waits in the hush between lightning and thunder. It lingers in the stillness of cotton fields under a dying sun, and somewhere deep in the soil of Mississippi, a heartbeat still echoes, slow, relentless, unforgiving. That's not the sound of death. It's the sound of remembrance. Because Caleb never truly left. He just became the breath of the land, the whisper in the storm, the voice in the wind, the ghost in the river's hum, reminding every generation that truth buried is never truth gone. So when the night falls heavy and you feel that chill in the still air, remember, some stories don't end, they keep breathing. If you drive through Mississippi today, past the billboards and the motels and the quiet rows of dying pines, you might think the past has been buried. But if you listen, really listen, you'll hear it breathing beneath the asphalt. The hum of the land hasn't stopped, it just learned to hide under progress. The road that cuts through Deer Creek was once the same path the slaves took to the fields. There's a gas station there now. Kids pump fuel, scrolling on their phones, never realizing that beneath the pavement are the same footprints that once bled into dust. Time built layers over truth, like paint over rot, but rot has a way of pushing through, and sometimes on nights when the moon glows full, people still see him. Not in the fields, not in the river, but reflected, in mirrors, in car windows, in the shimmer of glass doors right before closing time. A flash of white, the curve of a shoulder, a man standing too still to be real, and then he's gone. They call it Caleb's reflection. Some say he doesn't haunt the living, he reminds them that every act, every cruelty, every silence leaves a mark. That history isn't the past, it's the shadow you cast today. You see, ghosts don't stay where they died. They follow the bloodlines, the echoes, the inheritance of memory. And in that way, Caleb walks beside every man who's ever looked away from injustice. Every woman who's ever stayed silent when truth burned her tongue. Every nation that's ever tried to bury what it built its wealth upon. The ghost isn't in Mississippi anymore. He's in us. Because every time we turn from pain, every time we pretend the wound has healed just because we don't see the scar, we become the haunted. And maybe that's what Caleb wanted, not revenge, not peace, but for us to see that history never sleeps. It just waits for someone brave enough to remember it out loud. So if you ever feel that chill at your back when you pass an old field or catch your reflection at midnight and it feels different, don't be afraid. That's not a curse. That's memory looking you in the eye. Whisper his name and you'll feel it. That quiet electricity, that breath between worlds. Caleb isn't gone. He's become the echo of a promise that the land, the river, and the living will never forget again. Because forgetting is how ghosts are born, and remembering is how we set them free. So, before you go, look in the mirror tonight. Stare into your own reflection long enough to see the faces behind it. The ones who came before, the ones who couldn't speak, the ones who still hum through the soil. And if you feel that whisper inside you say, I remember, then maybe, just maybe you've heard Caleb too. The last thing you see when you close your eyes at night isn't always darkness. Sometimes it's a memory suspended between what was and what could have been. That's what Caleb became. A memory that refused to lie down. The albino ghost who walked fields of cotton now walks the corridors of history, untouchable yet undeniable. No ledger marks his final steps. No official record captures the precision with which he dismantled his master's life. Only the whispers remain, traveling through decades, threading their way into the soil, the river, the air. And if you're listening tonight alone or with others, those whispers are finding you. Because what Caleb did wasn't just revenge. It was revelation. He showed that cruelty, no matter how powerful, leaves cracks. That oppression, no matter how systematic, carries seeds of collapse. And that knowledge, forbidden, hidden, dangerous, can be a weapon in the hands of the patient, the wise, the unheard. And this is the truth most people never understand. Ghosts like Caleb aren't bound by death. They are bound by injustice, by memory, by the need to remind the living that history cannot be rewritten. You may walk past the ruins of the Rutledge plantation today, smile at the modern buildings, the paved roads, the neat fences, but the land remembers. And Caleb's memory walks silently beside you. The cypress knees still jut from the water like sentinels, guarding the secrets they've witnessed. The soil, thick and black, still carries the stain of both blood and truth. And if you wander the cotton fields, you might feel it. A presence that watches, that measures, that waits for acknowledgement. So here's what I ask of you, now, at this very moment. Do not turn away. Do not ignore the lessons buried beneath history. Caleb's story is not just a tale of horror, it is a call. A reminder that vigilance is not only for the living, but for the dead whose voices were almost silenced forever. If you felt that weight in the air, that shiver as the story unfolded, type, "The veil is broken," twice in the comments to seal this truth within you. Let it be more than a story you watched. Let it be a story that changes how you see the world, how you measure justice, and how you honor memory. Subscribe now, if you haven't yet, and comment where you are watching from. Because history listens, and so does Caleb. He is no longer a man. He is not merely a ghost. He is the truth that survives brutality, the reckoning that comes slowly, deliberately, when arrogance meets patience. He is proof that even in the darkest corners of history, the oppressed can rise, unseen, unstoppable, and unstoppable still, centuries later. And as the night settles over Mississippi, remember this: the land breathes, the river hums, and Caleb still waits in silence and in blood, ensuring that monsters are never invisible, that injustice never goes unremembered, and that every soul who witnesses, every listener who dares to hear, carries a part of his eternal reckoning. The story ends here, but the echo lasts forever.